jump in. Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a good Tuesday. Thanks for joining us today for our event on how NPR's tool DEX is tracking diversity in our news sources. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Phil. I am the Chief Academic Officer at Codesmith. So I essentially oversee all of the learning and instruction and curriculum that kind of happens within the entire company. And I'm excited to moderate today's panel with NPR. So they're going to be here to share with us on how their created tool DEX, which is a tracking tool that's attached to their content management system, as I understand it, which allows journalists at NPR to monitor the source diversity with the goal of having their story show accurately and reflect its audience. So before we dive into that, though, I wanted to take a quick moment and we'll introduce our two panelists. Unfortunately, Rolando's not going to be able to join us today because he's dealing with an emergency. So our thoughts go out to him. But we also have a few other people. We have Surya, who is a software development manager at NPR, graduated from University of Alabama, has been, as he puts it, dabbling in code at NPR for the past 16 years, which Surya, I don't know how you dabble in code for that long. I think you're being a little bit humble there, but excited to have you here nonetheless. And we also have Samantha Wessel, who is a Codesmith alumni that joined NPR after she graduated the program in March of last year, I believe. She works across the stack, particularly focusing around Angular development within their code bases. So it's wonderful to have you all here. Lovely to have you. I'm excited. Let's jump into a few questions.
Cool.
So, and feel free y'all to kind of jump in at any point in time, between the two of you to kind of answer any of these however you see fit. But first, kind of wanted to jump in more around and just get the explanation from y'all about, kind of what DEX is. So it seems like DEX, this, tool that y'all have created, has a lot of applicable use cases and is probably going to continually evolve and increase in the way that you all use it. But for our audience, do you mind kind of running us through what the main functions of DEX is and the reason why it was created in the first place?
Yeah. Do you want me to go first, Surya?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So the reason it was created, as you stated in the intro, Phil, a little bit, is that so NPR has what we call our North Star, and that's really continuing to grow and diversify our audience and just appeal to the wide range of folks that are in our country, right? And just make sure that we're also telling their stories. And in order to do that, the newsroom was looking at their sources and who they were talking to, and essentially they wanted a tool to be able to track those sources and figure out where they were coming from, who they were speaking to, and just kind of make sure that they weren't continuously speaking to the same people or the same types of folks. So you're just getting a more more interesting and complex background and different stories. Yeah, so that's how that came about. And I forgot the first part of your question. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. It just really what the rationale behind creating it was and kind of, that whole process. So I think we kind of, jumped into that. I think that was a good answer for that. I'm curious because, this sounds like a wonderful idea, this tool that helps kind of track these particular resources and things. What was NPR doing before, if anything, in terms of tracking resources and kind of, journalistic leads and things along those lines?
Google
Sheets.
Google Sheets. Yeah.
I think it was down to one or two people on a news desk keeping track on Google Sheets. So not the most efficient.
Yeah, that seems like that would be super complex in terms of the entire company of NPR kind of hosting all those things on a simple Google spreadsheet. So that's
right.
That's
There are a bunch of them, like it's not just one.
Yeah.
Like different silos.
There's different news desks within the newsroom. Mm-hmm. And Surya, am I right in that each news desk was collecting their own?
They have their own, they have their own.
So, and not necessarily in the same way and at the same time. And so I think it was just kind of this crazy amalgamation of random data.
Yeah, so nothing with like a central kind of syncing up between all of these different resources and, Google spreadsheets and things along those lines.
Right.
Gotcha. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in, and this is, Samantha, as you know, and as a few other people in this room know, that we kind of focus on a lot at Codesmith, is the kind of tech that goes into actually building of these types of tools and things. Can you explain a little bit about, what is some of the tech that went into building decks, and maybe even sharing a little bit of the rationale as to why certain tech was used to build this tool?
Yeah, I'll let Surya take
this is
that
over to anybody that feels good about jumping in on that.
Yeah, we already have a web application, the Seamus or the CMS of our system called Newsflex, which is on the web, right? So the DEX is not actually a separate tool. It's just built into the CMS we already have. Mm-hmm. So all the journalists they're already on the system. So we just have to build these modules. Even though they refer to as like a separate tool, it's mm-hmm. not, it's just, right? For us, it's very hard for them to tell them apart, it's the same tool. So yeah. So it's an Angular front end, and we we run on a Node proxy, and we have our own APIs which are actually, we built it over time. It's a C# REST API.
Gotcha.
In the backend, and talking to a SQL server. So we have like a partial, broken into some Unix server, some Windows. So we wanted to get rid of the Windows so that we can run on any environment.
Yeah.
But it's it's a big project in the making.
Gotcha. Yeah. Gotcha. So it sounds like primarily Angular on the front end with did you say C# backend?
Yeah. The REST API, served by the REST API. That's still in, and a lot of services are also on Windows servers. So that's written in C#.
I see. Gotcha. And if, I think I know the answer to this, but just in the interest of, transparency for the audience and things like that, what was the rationale behind, I understand the rationale around C# and kind of your infrastructure for the back end. Was there any particular rationale that went into choosing Angular for the front end, or is it primarily because that's what most of your code bases are already built in?
Yeah, that's the reason.
Yeah.
It's, I think, either React or Angular, and then we chose Angular because I think, I don't know why now.
Gotcha. Well, hey, if the rest of your code base is already built out in Angular, I suppose it makes sense. Yeah. Surya and Samantha, Surya, you don't know this, and Samantha, I know you know this. I'm very, very partial to React, and so is the rest of Codesmith, but I see the value in not changing up everything just to go over into React if your entire engineering team is already pretty proficient in Angular. So it makes sense. I gotcha. Yeah. Samantha, I would love to get a sense of actually, a glimpse of what this tool is actually like. If I understand it, you're prepared to kind of give us a quick demo of what this looks like?
Yep, I am. So I'll move you over here and then I'll share. And then Surya, please feel free to guide me if I mess anything up. Okay, so this is what the tool looks like when someone goes to create a source in our CMS. So I'll just enter myself. I'm in a sandbox, so this won't actually go to production. And so, yeah, so all of these categories and fields were decided upon through many, as I understand, many committee deliberations and discussions, which we can get into later if we want, and how that worked within the larger organization. So yeah, so that it's just kind of this fairly basic demographic information. You can see that some fields are required, such as descriptor, which is the person's profession. And then there's additional demographics here, including race and ethnicity, and gender, permanent residence, because if someone lives outside of the US, legally, once this information is entered once, it then needs to be hidden due to some EU laws. And so we need to make sure that we are compliant with that
GDPR regulations. Okay, GDPR. What?
Oh, GDPR, yeah. Yeah. And so, sorry, can I just do state here now?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right, and then there we go. And then, yeah, so the tags, I think that's to also show perhaps like areas of expertise, what kinds of topics that might be good to give this person, to reach out to this person about, etc. So you can add, I think, as many tags as you want. Is that correct, Surya?
Yeah. It's a semantic tagging. It's not actually completely done yet. Like, in the future you can, because, if it is not, it's not in the lookups, like you can actually make up your own stuff like that. So.
Right. Yeah. And so then you just create the record and then I'll exist in here. And then we also have, so that's just the basic data entry. And then we have something that really helps with the reporting. And oh gosh. So here you can see, this is an example of running a report to show where sources might be located, the sources that have been entered. And this is just this dummy data, but it can give you a sense of, oh, look, these are where people are, like, where our sources are actually located. And so while you think you might be reaching out to places, to sources throughout the country, you might actually say, oh, it's actually pretty coastal, right? Or like, yeah, so it's just like a nice visualization to kind of combat the human assumption, I think. Yeah. So I think this is where a lot of the benefit kind of demos. Yeah. So that's just a super quick overview.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to hear more, Samantha, on, you said that there was a committee that was kind of put together in terms of figuring out the proper types of questions to make sure that you're, having equal representation around different demographics and things along those lines. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how that went?
I'll let Surya take that one because he was in far more of those meetings.
Sure.
So there is this demographics, right? Like, and the biggest point we had was like, we still have this issue where, what is the difference between race and ethnicity?
Mm-hmm.
So everybody sees it differently, the stuff like that, right? And then how do you define genders, and what would you include and what would you exclude? Or, because I know, like, genders are broken into like so many categories, right? Like, so, and you use umbrella terms for some of them, like, you say, this, non-binary covers something, and some may not agree with that, stuff like that. Like, they would usually fight in the sense, like, discussion. Most of the times actually about these, a lot of discussions around that topic. All the demographics, how would they, the easiest one is like age, I think. And again, there was a question about, like, when you say 25 to 34, does it actually cover that decade or something like that? Even then, because journalists are, like, very into data, like, someone would argue one way. And so most of the discussions on that, and then they came up with this list of, lookups, to use. And the tool will actually allow you to, if you, the Cuban American is not included, like, you can add it, like, you can add it, it's not part of the lookups, but you can, recognize somebody as.
You can dynamically add those pieces.
Yeah. And also this is the question they ask them, and these are the choices they provide. And, because the hardest part is, like, not the tool, the lookups, and then how do you ask these questions? Like,
sure.
The source, that is also, so one of the things. And the other thing is, like, the legal ramifications of, the sources outside. You cannot collect, you can collect the data, but you cannot display it and store it in a, form where you can actually easily get to it or something. Yeah. And you cannot collect employees because we have, like, a lot of sources who are also employees. So you cannot actually collect their data through our system, or we cannot store it. So it has to come from HR or someplace else. So stuff like that, these are all challenges, but it's not the software. It's so
yeah. So it sounds like the most challenging part of the building of this tool wasn't necessarily and I'm cautious on how I even say this, because I'm sure there's lots of complexities that go into building a tool like this, but it sounds like some of the more challenging pieces wasn't even the building of the tool, it's the actual method in which you collect the information from people.
Yeah, and how do you get to that lookups? Yeah, that was the hard part for me, at least. They would actually do one way, and then maybe 2-3 weeks later they have a separate discussion, and then they would change it. So we've been like so
such as the challenges of building modern day software and the DevOps infrastructure and things along those lines. I'm curious, and again, either to Surya or Samantha, how long have y'all been in production of this tool itself, and kind of curious on what the team looked like that was building out this tool? Was it?
I think it went in live July.
Engineers across
mid-July or something.
Is it a more dedicated team?
Sorry, I think Phil, your audio might have gotten a little messed up.
Gotcha.
Sorry. So yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, mid-July, I would say. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. I think he's frozen, right?
Yeah, I think you might be.
I'm sorry, it might be.
No worries. And then I think he also asked about the team, like what the team looked like.
Yeah, we had 3 developers, right? Including me. I mean, if you count me, we had Sam actually also worked on it. So we had 3 developers and me, and then we had Rolando actually representing the users. So he would actually, come up with help us write the requirements properly. And then Kyle helped us too. I think he's on the call too.
Yeah, he's here.
Yeah. He was the data shepherd, he would actually do the legal angle. It's fun working with all the people, and I haven't worked with journalists this close. The problem with this project is it's very sensitive too. you cannot say I need to say it's Hispanic or Latinx. Just choose one. I cannot say that the things.
Of course,
it's very sensitive around all the issues. One thing we had was one of the things which is really jumped out was there's something called preferred name or something one of the I mean nobody thought about that. We just used it, and somebody raised a question that legal name or preferred name or something like that. So it was so it was it's very sensitive thing. So
yeah.
That's wonderful. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Samantha.
I was going to say there's lots of user testing and throughout the process too to get feedback. And I think that also led to further discussions of how we label things. And going off of what Surya just said, because it's demographic data, it's also it can be just generally sensitive information for people and how they identify or express themselves. And so it was an exercise in doing your best to collect data without inadvertently causing harm to someone through misidentifying them in any way. So that's been an interesting challenge that I think is still ongoing and will probably continue to be ongoing.
Yeah, I can only imagine the challenges that kind of come up with aggregating that type of data, but nonetheless, obviously a very important thing, especially for a company such as NPR and the mission that y'all have as a company. I think it's again, super inspiring because I know how challenging it probably is to kind of hit all of those points in collecting this type of data. So, super appreciative that y'all are still taking on those challenges. And speaking of challenges, I know we talked a little bit about this, but I'm curious if there was any other notable points in terms of challenges that you all and the rest of the engineering team had with building decks. Over to anyone.
The UI was people did not even agree on the UI. from a journalist point of view, I just want to enter a minimum information to get through, right? There is the compliance angle as well. Like, I just wanted to just do, and but the thing is, like, demographics is like key. Like, let's say I wanted to put a source in the system, all I have to do is like just a name or something like that, right? There is that is on one side, and on the other side, like, we wanted to, make sure people enter this information. So what is the minimum amount of information? What is a useful amount of information? So there are two different things. So that is, so we went through the, UI looks, I think, much better before, but now, like, we had to go through like.
It looks great right now. I don't know where it came from, but it looks awesome.
Yeah, it looked better. So, then, yeah.
Okay. I read in a recent article that was published about DEX. I read, and I'm sorry, I'm reading from some notes here because there's some figures here, but that since implementing this tool, the proportion of sources who are women have increased from 28 to 40%, and from people of color from 16 to 30%, which is, a pretty substantial jump right there. So that's pretty incredible, just seeing where it's gone since implementing this tool. I'm curious, what underrepresented groups are you specifically excited to see, DEX giving voice to in this situation?
Sorry, I will speak. For me personally, I mean, I listen to NPR all the time. There are a lot of transsexual folks they talk to now. I mean, I don't know if I noticed this or not. I haven't looked at any numbers or anything like that recently. I don't know, like, how much people look at the reports, or, I don't know that yet, but, that's, I mean, actually it's very happy to work on the tool where, it'll actually make immediate difference, even though, we don't know that at that time. So that's happy. Go ahead, Sam. Sorry.
I was going to say, I know that the organization as a whole is working really hard to reach out to more Latina and Black folks. And so I think that is probably, I'm excited to see those sources increase as well. And just like location of sources, I do think that while NPR has done a great job at continuing to as you just said, the stats with women and people of color, I think it still can be largely coastal, just by nature of where our bureaus are located. I think it's just an ease. So I'm hopeful to see more of the country being reached out to as sources, because if we have this goal of telling stories that apply to the whole nation, we gotta get to the middle of the nation too. So I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, of course. You have to have sources that are coming from all over the country. Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, I think this is such an amazing jump towards, accomplishing that goal. Yeah. What do you, Samantha and Surya, what do you both hope in terms of how this tool will impact the greater news world in this industry?
Go ahead.
But yeah, for me, I just hope I appreciate that NPR is being pretty transparent about it, and saying, hey, we know that that we have room for improvement here, and this is how we're approaching it. And then I'm curious to see how, as we become transparent and showing where our sources are still lacking and where they're growing, how other news organizations respond. I think it's important to be transparent about where your sources are coming from. And I'm excited to see if other news organizations start to pick it up. And I'm also excited to, hopefully this trickles down to some of our member stations as well. So they are also, in their local stories, are start adopting some of these practices even more.
Gotcha. Surya, I'm sorry, I didn't know if you wanted something to add on there.
Yeah, I mean, right now, after we did the tool, like, a lot of member stations are asking to be, I think there was a Reuters article as soon as we did the tool. So a lot of member stations wanted to get involved, and we are working with them so that we can offer this to member stations as well. That's the first step. And then I think other people have reached as well. I'm not aware of. I mean, I don't know which organization, I forget, but they're trying to do the same thing, or somebody did something similar. For me as a tool, I hope, like, right now we don't have 100% compliance in the organization yet.
Yeah,
we wanted to achieve that as a first step, and then the numbers will come out, and then they will make it better and all that. So yeah, hopefully that will happen at NPR. A good thing is, like, they try to do this. That's the first step, right? So
yeah. So the hopes is that this DEX specifically, or tools such as DEX, will essentially catch on to other news organizations within the industry, and we'll start to see this transparency with other news organizations.
Yeah. Hopefully you can share the sources outside too. I mean, one thing, I think in one of the discussions, somebody said, like, when you bring in an African American, not to just talk about race, like, something else, that would be like a huge progress. So
and Samantha, you mentioned particularly just the transparency piece behind this, and obviously that was a huge motivation to build DEX in the first place. And this is a bit of an unscripted question here that just came from our discussion, but does NPR have a process that they're already putting into place in terms of, like, publishing these numbers even outside of the company?
I'm not 100% sure, actually. Sorry, do you know?
I usually it's not easy to do. Let's say I'm looking at last 3-4 years of data, right? Like, the RAD team has to go through. They have to get the sources and try to find the information if it is available, and then they have to compile a list. And again, they will only count it, like, if you're talking to an African American and it's not about a race story or something like that, that is different from, like, talking to an expert on something else. So they're actually counted differently. I think they publish this information, and it's not easy to do. It takes, like, a lot of work to do this if you don't have the data at hand. I don't know the thing about, like, if they're actually willing to publish. I mean, I have no clue.
Yeah. I mean, we are a nonprofit, so we do have to publish a fairly decent amount of information anyway. So I would be surprised if eventually this doesn't, some version of this information gets released, whether some might be proprietary, as anything can be, but I imagine that some of it will get out there. But, and to speak to what Surya just said, because this tool is recent too, as we mentioned, there are years and years of spreadsheets. So it's, as far as I know, they still are working on getting that data in, if they even are going to get that data in. And I think from right now, it's current, like, stories now moving forward. I don't know that there's a big push right now to retroactively add information.
I see. Yeah. That would be quite an engineering feat in and of itself, I would assume, to go back years into the spreadsheets to kind of aggregate the stuff back into DEX.
Yeah, I mean, NPR itself has been around for 50 years this year, so I mean, it's quite
quite a lot of spreadsheets. Yeah, gotcha.
The collection of this information, I think, only started like 2 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, great. Those are the main pieces that I definitely wanted to get on the radar and kind of get over to you, Samantha and Surya. But I'd love to open up now to folks in the room if anybody has any questions. I think we've decided on going into the chat for those questions. So if y'all want to throw some questions in the chat, either Caitlin or myself will read them off, and we'll kind of take it from there and do a little bit of a Q&A session here.
And also, while we're waiting for questions, if any are coming through, I figured I should maybe clarify when I was talking about member stations, in case folks don't know how it works. So Surya and I work at NPR HQ, and then there are member stations that probably, if y'all have listened, you're listening to your member station, and so they aren't actually NPR itself. They are independent stations that pay membership fees to NPR, and then get programming that way. So that's kind of how it works. So when you're listening to your local station, you're not listening to an NPR station. You're listening to a public radio station that's a member station. So that's why when we were saying member stations are interested in this, that's why they don't automatically have it, because they are a separate entity from HQ.
Gotcha. And I'm assuming that NPR HQ is currently in the process of trying to get that compliance with these different member stations then, in terms of using DEX.
I think that Surya said that there's interest from the member stations, but I think we're still working on getting everything rolling pretty well at HQ, and then we can have conversations about getting it out to member stations, because there's a bunch of them. So
yeah.
Okay.
Wonderful. Okay, well, looks like we got a bunch of messages in here. So let's go through a few of them here. One question we have is, are there any improvements or updates you want to make or anticipate making with DEX to expand on the data it collects and how it is being used?
We just fixed like a bunch of bugs and there are some of the requirements are left out, right? So we are actually, like, you know, the way it is built and how people interpret it and how they, when they use it, you know, they find. So we fix some of them, and we have like a couple of reports we did. It's very useful to some people. Some people are asking for more reports, so we are working on that, and you know, can export the report as a PDF or a, you know, even sheet, or Excel or something. Like we are still doing that, so that, you know, they can manipulate the data they want it and all that. So that's all in there. We're still making changes though.
Gotcha. We have another question here from a very familiar name, Alex Mannix. Alex, great to have you here. Just throw up the heart. Alex asks, can you talk about the difference between working in an existing code base versus building out a new tool? This is a great question.
We never had an idea to build like a completely new tool, because we have like limited resources in our team. Mm-hmm. And we're actually pretty swamped, and this is something actually we all wanted to do, and we just work with an existing code base, because all the data is the connecting data is like, you know, all our reporters, all our, you know, staff is in the existing, and any source you create, you actually attach to our data we already have. So mm-hmm. Yeah, we did not even contemplate building completely new tool. It's just
didn't even cross the mind.
No.
Yeah.
Now actually I think back, because of how people are asking, I think it's a better decision, because people are just wanted to, can I just buy DEX, you know, that.
Second guessing that choice.
Yeah,
now.
The thing is, it's the sources, just sources are useless until you actually put them on air, right? Like, you know, mm-hmm. You talk to sources, but you have to talk to them on air, otherwise it's useless. So
yeah.
Before I came to NPR, I was at a startup, and so it was a fairly small code base, so we were kind of building from the ground up. And then coming into this team, first off, everyone's been around for a while, so I was coming into a team that had a pretty great knowledge base, and also it was a big code base, much larger than the one I was coming from. So to speak to Alex's point, like it definitely for me felt like it took a lot longer to get my head around where everything was, and I mean, there's some days where I'm still trying to find where things exist, because it's just it's a big code base, and NewsFlex has been around a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So
2008.
Yeah, we're at, sorry?
2008.
Yeah, 2008. Yeah. So, you know, while I originally thought that the startup code base was big, now looking back, it was nothing. I was able to get my head around that within a week or so. And as I said, here there's some days where I'm just like, oh, I have to search my entire project to find what I'm looking for.
Yeah. I mean, I know that's a big challenge that a lot of folks at Codesmith in particular, and other engineers that I've worked with before in the past, when going into those more substantial scaled and just like older code bases, sometimes it's a bit hard to get over that block of not knowing what every line of code is doing, or even knowing every line of code in a code base, but just getting more comfortable with understanding that that's okay. And that's kind of the norm when you're an engineer in this industry nowadays.
Yeah. And to be fair, I also then will write lines of code that I don't know what they're doing. So it happens to the best of us.
All right. We have another question here that says, is there a particular state management library used for Angular? So I don't know if we're referring directly to the DEX tool, if there's a particular state management library that's being used there with Angular.
No, we don't use, yeah.
One of our other developers, really, he does not like state management tools. He's pretty adamant about it. Angular does have one, I think it's RxJS, which we use some things from RxJS, but we don't use the state management portion of it. I saw when I first started that it looked like someone had tried to implement Redux into our, because Redux can be used with anything.
Speaking my love language right now, Samantha.
But the commit message said, "Goodbye, Redux. You were more trouble than you were worth."
Oh. My goodness.
So I feel like that summarizes how our team approaches the state management.
Oh, how dare you, Samantha?
Yeah.
That is a lifelong love of mine.
I don't miss it. Like, I don't think that we really need it. That's one of the pros, I think, of Angular is with the observables and the event emitters, that it's a lot more manageable without a state management.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the pros of Angular. You have multiple ways, as compared to something that's more opinionated like React, and very specific ways of data flow and things along those lines. So yeah, I can totally understand that.
Yeah.
We have another question here that says, Samantha mentioned that member stations aren't on this new platform. Do they also use Google Sheets method?
Yeah.
Eric's coming in with the hard questions tonight.
Unfortunately, our team doesn't have a lot of insight into what the member stations do. We have a whole team at NPR that talks to member stations, and we are not those folks. So unclear. Sorry, Eric.
But hopefully very clear soon that they are going to be using DEX.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another question here says, in the PowerPoint, Samantha illustrated some dummy data with the visualization using Google Maps. Can you explain a little bit about how the tool works with the Google Maps API? And that's assuming that was the Google Maps API, Samantha?
I'll let Surya take that one because that was all him.
I think Joe wrote that code. Yeah, we just use Maps API, and then because we cannot put a public key outside, right? So we have like we proxy one of the ones which makes like a lot of calls on the server side, because we use Node server as well. So, and then we just talk to Maps API, and then we just put it on the, because when she showed how we do the permanent location, you just feed it to the Maps, and then yeah, it's very easy. And we do the same thing with location. That's Maps, and then we use Places API for the drop downs. And
gotcha.
Hope.
Gotcha. Okay. This next question is actually really interesting to me. I know we talked a little bit about some of the challenges that you guys had with this, just by virtue of having so much sensitive information and things along those lines. But Jacob asks, he says, I'd be curious to hear about all the data. How do y'all keep it secure and clean? Is there any more insights that y'all can give around the management and storage of that data?
First off, of course, Jacob would ask this question. I know Jacob, so how dare you?
Classic Jacob.
Yeah, our app is behind, we use Okta. So there is one level of security there, and you have to be authenticated to get into the app. And the other kind of security, I don't know, we use proper patterns, I think. I don't know what, yeah, that's it. Like, people cannot get into our data without authentication. That is one. And we are protected against SQL injection attacks and all that. I don't know what other kinds of security. We don't encode our data. That is like one of the requests from legal, that we encode all the data, but I cannot reach my database. So, I think it is secure.
Gotcha. This is a good next question, because I actually had the same question too before I did a little bit more reading on DEX. But Eric asked, where does the name DEX come from?
Yeah, the guy who's not on this panel, Rolodex, people still have them. Like, actually, I have seen the bookers have them on their desks. I mean, everyone works from home now, but I've seen like so many Rolodexes in our old building. So it's a play on that. Like, Rolo is our Rolando. We call him Rolo. Is our product manager for this. So yeah, it's a play on that words. Like,
so he put a little bit of his own name in there.
Yeah. Well, Surya came up with the name.
And I think it also makes a abbreviation too, right? So something diversity, something enterprise, some X, something. I don't know what I forget now.
Gotcha. Michael says, you went over it quickly, but how is reporting generated for this tool? It looks like it was using Google Slides, but does it use Google's App Scripts platform in any way?
Oh, I was just using Google Slides to show an example.
That's what it looked like.
But I'll let Surya talk about how the reports are generated.
Yeah, we just get data directly from the API, the SQL stored procs, and then we just display it as a grid. And also we use like for visual things, we use like charts as well, like chart.js or something, so that it will display in a pie chart or a graph or something like that. And we just export the list, the table data as an Excel or CSV or something like that, so that they can, and PDF too. We use some libraries. I forget what they are.
Gotcha. And Terry says, longtime listener, first time caller / texter. When adding a robust tool such as DEX to your CMS, as an engineer and also an engineering manager, what are the biggest technical challenges that need to be assessed or addressed early on in the process?
Yeah, we have to get the user sign the contract that this is it, and then otherwise, the thing is, like, we had this changing requirements like every week. So usually we had this like meetings on Thursdays, and they would actually expect to see the product like the next Thursday, like, whatever changes. And on the top of that, we had to fix bugs, like, and I have to push this into our the UAT so that they can test it and all that. That was like really challenging, and people, that was a challenging part for me, at least. This technology we have seen, like, nothing new in there. It's just like entering a bunch of data if you look at it now, but it's just people agreeing on stuff. I mean, that is hard for me.
Based on going off of what Surya said, I think just time management and priority management, because as Surya mentioned, we're a small team, and we don't just have one thing going at a time. Like, we weren't just working on DEX, we were working on several other projects. And so it's just trying to figure out what comes next, what's top priority. And then for me, because I onboarded remotely, has always been just making sure that what I'm doing fits in with what other folks are doing, without being able to turn in the office and say, hey, does this make sense? And I mean, everyone's super responsive on Slack. It's not a negative thing at all, but it's just making sure that I understand where everything fits in the larger process of NewsFlex and our long-ranging goals. So that's always been a mini challenge for me, is trying to figure out how it makes sense. And then if something like it already exists, and to make sure that I'm not breaking it, because that happens.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of the normal challenges that many people in the room have probably seen going into the remote setting as an engineer, and just the communication and making sure the rest of the team is on the same page, and competing priorities and things along those lines.
And our team's really good about it. So,
yeah.
But yeah, that's always just the challenge.
Gotcha. Michael asks, is the tool able to represent connections between sources like you would see with a CRM software?
Between sources, like I don't know what kind of reference. We have these tags, like, you can tag and say, because somebody's a professor, right? Like, you can say, we can kind of, we don't have that in the system yet, but the data is there, like, that is not one of the requirements yet. But a couple of sources can be tied to a story, like, they're on the same story, that is already done. Does that answer the question? Or what? I don't know what kind of connections are we talking about.
It sounds like there might not be a need for those connections just yet, which I think kind of answers the question in and of itself.
But we do have collect the data, like, they can always make that.
I see. This is a really good one. This one's directed at Samantha here. And I think we were going to try to push some of these types of more specific questions and kind of your Codesmith experience and things like that towards the end, but it looks like we are kind of coming down to the last few questions. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this one out there. E says, I'm interested to hearing about Samantha's experience getting into Angular. Having come from React being taught at Codesmith, did you have prior experience with Angular? And if not, how easy or difficult was it getting ramped up into Angular?
I had no experience with Angular, except to kind of get a little bit familiar with it for the interview process, but not writing it until I started. So as I was getting ready to start, I got a Udemy course, the Fundamentals of Angular, I think it's by Maximilian Schwartzmüller, I think is his name. And that helped me get a greater understanding of how the pieces and parts worked. But I would say it wasn't until I was working in the code every day that I actually saw how everything worked together that I felt comfortable. Ramp up, I mean, my judgment and Surya's judgment might be too different. But I think I was able to start contributing relatively quickly, maybe not the most complex PRs in the world, but getting familiar with it. I think I would say I felt pretty comfortable with the super basics about and I mean super basics, like a month or so in, but I'm still learning Angular tricks today. So I feel comfortable with it. I can't write React anymore. I have sat down to try and write React and it's gone. It's out of my head. I'm full Angular brain at this point. I'm sure if I, spend a little more time with it, it'd come rushing back. But yeah, my head is all Angular. But I'm going to say something controversial. I like Angular more than React.
Oh,
I know.
Sorry, Samantha, your connection was starting to break off.
I know, I'm so sorry.
It sounded like you said something crazy for a second there. No, I'm joking. I'm joking, of course.
I like that I like that the services are broken up from the components. And while at first it can be a little overwhelming, the different files, I actually like it more. I think it helps if you're following best practices, can help you write cleaner code. I found that when I wrote React components, they would balloon very quickly and then I would get lost in the weeds. And, part of that was me being a baby developer, but I think just naturally going into Angular, it separates that a little bit. So I like it more.
Gotcha. And I'll, at the risk of asking a bit of a leading question here, Samantha, do you think that, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this, but do you think that your experience with a similar front-end technology such as React helped you to onboard something else, whether at the Angular Vue or whatever the case may be, a bit easier since you had that other piece kind of under your belt going into it?
Absolutely. And I've said this in other things where I feel like frameworks are kind of like romantic languages, right? Where like they have their own versions and there are different words, but the base is the same.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of figure out what's going on alone based on the base of the language. And so, yeah, that was definitely helpful. I mean, if I didn't have the React experience, it would have taken me far longer to ramp up into Angular. So yeah, definitely, it's helpful. I think once you learn one, you can learn another, right? Like it's different flavors, but you know, they're all
the hardest piece is always your first piece. After that, it becomes much more natural to draw parallels between the two technologies or languages or whatever.
Right. And like I haven't written a lot or any really C# code, but I can read it, right? Like, and it's because I know JavaScript, I know the fundamentals, and I can go in and kind of figure out what's going on. So it's the same with the framework.
Yeah, I love that. And this may be something we kind of already answered, but I'll throw it at you anyway, Samantha, just to see if you take it a different direction. But Michael asks, was there anything that Samantha learned at Codesmith that really helped her with working at NPR?
At NPR specifically, yeah, actually, so the community part of it, I think just like working with the team was really helpful, and to really going into any place that you work, but particularly NPR and my team, it's as we said before, it's a small team, and so just having that background of what it's like to work together and get things done in a complex environment was helpful. In regards to more technical things, I would say Codesmith taught me how to learn tech. And so if I'm stuck on a problem, it taught me how to try and figure out the solution and solve for the solution. And so, you know, I don't use React anymore, but like we just said, I learned how to learn React. And so from that, I was able to learn how to learn Angular. And I think that's really like learning documentation, that's been helpful. So yeah, don't underestimate the ability to learn how to learn, because that's pretty valuable.
Absolutely. Jacob asks, says, speaking of the API payload, are y'all pulling all the data to populate the report view? If so, how are y'all handling what could be a large data set on the web client? I don't know if anybody feels more equipped to answer that question right now.
We don't have that much data yet, but in the other world, like, you know, we paginate, you know, we cache data mostly on the server. It's like, you know, on the network, so it's not. Yeah, we do pagination. So that's what.
Gotcha. All right. It's wonderful to see all of your faces. Yeah, again, Samantha, Surya, it was wonderful to have the two of you on. I love talking about these particular topics. You know, in my opinion, I think tech is at its best when it's used to push forward values such as what NPR is doing and these kind of different strides that y'all are doing with Dex. So again, thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. Take care.
Bye.
And y'all around.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.